Let's continue the Lord of the Rings retrospective series with the Two Towers, or as I like to call it, this is where the fun really begins. A lot of people often talk about the Two Towers as sort of the middle chapter, something that gets a lot of love, but may or may not be the best Lord of the Rings movie. Now, while you could say that, especially with the next one that's coming, I always have a love for the Two Towers. For me, this has always been one of those movies where things really kicked up a notch. You had a really great setup and introduction to the characters in the Fellowship of the Ring. That movie was incredible. It did an excellent job of setting up the stakes that Frodo and Sam and everyone else would have to go through with the sequel. And then going into the sequel, right out the gate, things pick up dramatically, including with an extended sequence of Gandalf fighting the Balrog, which is really, really great. And eventually from there, you get to what many consider to be the best part of this entire trilogy.
Master's my friend. You don't have any friends. Nobody likes you. Not listening. Not listening.
Now, I didn't mention this in the first video, but Gollum to me is one of those characters that is just a minor miracle. Actually, it's kind of an impressive feat because at that time, the concept of motion capture was still coming into play. There were lots of things going on and lots of variables being considered when it came to bringing a performance like that to life. And what you got with Gollum is something that seems to have really stood the test of time. Even now when you watch this movie, especially now in 22 years after it came out. The fact that it looks as timeless as it does is genuinely remarkable. And the fact that you can make out every single nuance on that face is genuinely amazing. I also am one of those people who believes that when it comes to motion capture, not only there should there be more consideration when it comes to accolades, but there should be also more consideration when it comes to Andy Serkis as a performer, who I think is an absolute gem of an actor. And he has impressed time and time again with movies, and he continues to do so. He has done an outstanding job when it comes to this field, and even just as an actor in general, there's always something that he brings to the table, like an A game and then some. But I'm getting ahead of myself over here because I also want to take a second to just, lay it out to you as to how I saw this movie. Now, I mentioned that I grew up on it. In the first video, I talked about how, my family eventually got me into it. But the Two Towers, I actually saw this much later. And this was around the time that I was really getting into movies and I was really starting to explore what else was there in the world. And so we had the DVDs. We bought the extended edition DVDs, which are still lying with us, as I mentioned then. And the Two Towers was on, separate discs. So I remember one day I decided to just knock them all out. And this was a lot more recent than you'd think. Actually, 2011 to be precise. And it was during a time when I really don't think it's a good time to watch movies like this. Examinations in school. And yet I decided, you know what, in the middle of my studies, I'm going to watch The Two Towers and The Return of the King. If my parents are watching this, I'm sorry. But at the same time, I had no regrets about that because I really loved those experiences. And right as soon as I was done with The Two Towers, which I had seen in spurts over the years, to actually see it properly laid out like that, the full 3 hours and 55 minutes of this extended edition, it really was remarkable. And what I think is happening with this movie is really special. I always found it weird when this was considered a not as good movie, as the first one. I always found that to be a disagreeable statement because to me, I enjoyed this just as much as the first one. I also think that every Lord of the Rings movie is a phenomenal feat of filmmaking, so maybe that's playing into it as well. But I remember the first time this got over and thinking, holy shit, this is really something else. Everything is dialed up a notch here. From the way that it looks, the visuals are outstanding. The action sequences definitely take a bump up here as well. The performances, already talked about Gollum here a bit, but I'll talk more about him in a second. And of course, with, just the direction, the score, every single thing in this movie is just leagues more advanced than anything, and it's only 1 year after the Fellowship of the Ring. So to see a massive change just between those two movies is absolutely remarkable. I have to talk about those action sequences because they're truly amazing, especially that final hour at Helm's Deep, eventually fighting the Witch King of Angmar on the other side of things. All of it is just so great. The Ents marching on Isengard, also great. I mean, there is no such thing as a bad action sequence in Lord of the Rings in this trilogy. But I also think it's just remarkable how even for the middle chapter, so much feels climactic. And that's another thing to me. What I love about these movies is that despite the fact that you know the conclusion, like especially in this case, you know there's another movie coming, there's still stakes. You feel like every character could face the imminent doom in the next moment. You know, when you're having sequences where they're pushed against their limits, it's really, really great. And that just helps with the fact that all the characters are really well developed. I loved the fact that Gandalf made it. Of course, I knew he made it, but at the same time, seeing him come back as Gandalf the White was pretty awesome. Him explaining how he survived the Balrog sequence, that was really great. The entire thing with Pippin and Merry as they meet Treebeard and then eventually the rest of the Ents, that was really, really great. Fangorn Forest is a genuinely super interesting place to be in at any point of time in your life, I guess. The story following Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas as they're going from one part of Middle-earth to another, looking for the hobbits, but also just trying to get to the other armies is also really, really great. Eventually reaching King Theoden, and eventually that scene where he has been corrupted by Saruman and he has to be released from that spell is so great. There's that whole healing moment that happens there. And I think Theoden is one of the most awesome characters in Lord of the Rings lore. So I mean, obviously this is, something that I'll constantly come back to, and I'll talk more about this for the next movie. But when it comes to that alliance of men coming together, the elves fighting alongside, especially in the ending of the movie, so great. But also this movie, I'm missing something core here, which is talking about what really gets enhanced, and that is Frodo and Sam's entire journey. This is the movie where Elijah Wood, Sean Astin, I feel like they really, really came into their own, and the on and off, back and forth between them, the chemistry between them as actors is incredible. You can look at these two and think that they're acting in another kind of movie. It really feels like Frodo and Sam have come to life. I don't think I've ever talked about this, but one of my favorite movie scenes of all time is in The Two Towers. It happens close to the end of the movie when instead of, having the ring go over to the Witch King, Sam stops Frodo and Frodo is about to stab him. But then it doesn't happen, and then Sam, then trying to respond to Frodo about all of this being so unfair, talks about the stories that really matter. That entire monologue is beautifully done, scored wonderfully by Howard Shore, and there's so many great dialogue moments like that. Gollum's whole conversation with himself, aka Smeagol, where he's trying to wrestle with his thoughts, is one of the best scenes as well for me. And that, again, it's just such a wonderful representation of these characters. Every decision that they take from that point onwards, as they've met and eventually leading over to Mordor, it's all beautifully executed. I mean, that's the thing about this trilogy. Everything is pitch perfect, exactly as it should be. There's not a single moment that in any of these movies feels like it doesn't belong. A scene that plays out too long or, just feels like it's, adding to something. It's all perfectly placed and intricately done. And I think that's why I love these movies so much. It's always great to revisit The Two Towers. I mentioned in the previous video, I did a marathon with my parents back in January. When you got to this movie, seeing the entire thing in succession, it's truly incredible stuff. And it also led to my favorite, a running joke of sorts in between these two movies, between Legolas and Gimli counting how many orcs that they're killing. It's really, really great stuff. I mean, especially when you get to the next one. I feel like I'm teasing that next one a lot, but there's so much I have to say about Return of the King, and we will get to that video very, very soon. I can't wait to talk to you guys about that movie. But for my money's worth, much like The Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers is another excellent movie. wonderfully done. As a middle chapter, I think it's one of the best middle chapters of all time, with Empire Strikes Back up there. I think it's absolutely remarkable, and it is one of the best movies of all time, and one of my favorites especially. I watch it every so often, and I just get transfixed with all of it once again. Beautiful world building through and through, so many quotable moments as well. What a miracle of a movie, once again. And now we're gonna talk about the third one very soon, and I can't wait to get into that more with you guys. So guys, thank you very much for watching. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. I hope you guys come back for the Return of the King tomorrow. Very much looking forward to talking about that with you guys. As always, if you like this, may you please subscribe. Thank you. Hope you do. And I'll see you guys at the movies.